I think we'll get started, and then anyone else who comes to join us, we will let them in as time goes on. So hi everyone, welcome to our webinar on taking global opportunities with Giant Finance Plus, as we look at the benefits and risks of taking your business overseas. Just to start off by introducing myself, I'm Betty and I work here at Giant Group as part of the marketing team, especially focusing on our events and webinars. Over the next 40 minutes or so, we'll cover the following topics: the changing landscape and why businesses are looking at overseas opportunities, how to navigate differences in overseas countries, an introduction to Giant Global Payroll, compliance with different laws and regulations in each country, and the risks that are involved with this, opening doors globally, leading to huge opportunities. How can Giant support you with all of this? We expect there to be lots of questions, so please send them via the Q&A function at the top of your screens, and we will leave 20 minutes or so to address as many as possible. Our keynote speakers are firstly Rich Foster, who is our Sales and Clients Director at Giant Finance Plus and has been with the business for over 20 years. Hi, Rich.
Hi, everybody.
He heads up the Giant Finance Plus team, who provide invoice finance and back office to recruitment agencies across all sectors. And secondly, Charles. Hi, Charles.
Hi.
So Charles Daw, who is our Managing Director at Global Payroll, with a decade of experience working to provide contractor management solutions. He is leading the mission to introduce Giant's global payroll solution to the world. So without further ado, let's begin to ask our experts some questions today. So Rich, over to you.
Brilliant. Thanks for that wonderful introduction, Betty. Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, so today Charles and I are going to be discussing taking global opportunities with Giant Finance Plus. So I'll be hosting, talking about the impacts and the changes my clients have seen at Giant, and also Charles's expertise in Giant Global, identifying how we can do this or how we can help you, and also the threats and the opportunities to look for. So first, it's probably worth just discussing what global opportunities are, what going global means. So at Giant Finance Plus, we've got around 200 to 250 recruitment agencies focused within lots of different sectors, different types of candidate and contractors each week. And we've seen an increase, particularly in the last few months, with those agencies being asked by their clients if they can provide workers abroad. So not only contractors into UK businesses abroad, but also businesses based abroad, such as in Belgium, the Netherlands, the US, etc. And it's becoming something that's, becoming more commonplace. So what is global recruitment? So global recruitment, as it says here, is the building of a client base and workforce that isn't limited by geographical boundaries. So basically expanding your business into the international market. Obviously, the larger places you can supply, the more business that you can do. And why has it become so prominent now? Why is everybody suddenly talking about this? Well, I think the key things are the four things that are listed here. So technological advances. As a community or as a world, we're now closer than ever on a global scale because of technological advances. So there might be people on this call that aren't based in the UK because of things like Zoom, because of Teams, etc. We're finding it's easier to work closer and closer with people, and global boundaries or geographical boundaries aren't really there anymore. So we can supply good workers, or certainly our clients can, into different countries. The hybrid workforce. So we ourselves at Giant, we have half of our workforce in the office, half working from home around the UK and other areas in the world. And clearly that means you don't have to have a presence in that said country now, which wasn't always the case. And probably the most important one at the moment, which is what we're seeing the impacts of, is the economic situation, certainly in the UK. So obviously everyone's aware of the upcoming election and the impact that's going to have potentially on the UK hiring market. But we have seen it drop in terms of the number of vacancies available and certainly the number of skilled workers available. So our clients are having to look at different markets, be that in different sectors or different countries, to try and continue to keep the same levels of throughput and income up. And particularly the UK recruiter experience. So businesses or recruitment businesses in the UK world leading. I think it's fair to say. So we have been there a lot longer. We, as in the recruitment business, we know more about the structure, the process, etc., placing candidates and everything that comes with that. So we have very much some transferable skills. In some countries that don't have that level of knowledge yet. So it's certainly something that other countries will look to us for help. So Betty, if you can just move on to the next slide, please. One of the things we're just discussing before I hand over to Charles is the benefits of global expansion. So what will it do for your business? Because clearly, as we'll come on to, there's a lot of work involved and a lot of risks involved in doing it. So a few things we just listed down here. So expand your client base. So clearly there may be clients that you aspirationally want to deal with or place candidates or contractors with, but you just can't do that within the UK. So if you have the ability to pay into a country or different currency, you'd be able to expand your client base, and that obviously opens up to a number of opportunities. Being able to do that, so having a presence in another country also will enable you to build your brand. Obviously, more people becoming aware of you, more opportunities out of the back of that. Accessing new talent, so having a presence in another country, be it actually physical or just being able to provide candidates or workers out there, will make you aware to the workforce that's out there. And as we've said before, your consultants or directors, etc., of those businesses don't need to be in the UK, so you have access to new talent. It's certainly something within Giant Finance Plus we've done over the last 2 years, really, since the global pandemic, and we widened our net in terms of the workers we could look for. I know, Betty, you're not based where we are. It's great that we're able to get more people in at a higher level, and we're no longer constrained by geography, as we talked about before. A good one that Charles raised, actually, when we spoke the other week, was staying ahead of the competition. So if you've got a client of yours, maybe one of your main clients, and you're providing 100 workers every week, you've got a really good contract, and they just come to me and say, I've got 5 workers I need you to place into the Netherlands, for example. Oh, I can't do that. Okay, that's fine. Somebody else comes in and places those 5 workers. Suddenly someone else has got their foot in the door. So you never had a threat before, but because you couldn't offer something they needed, someone else is now looking at your other contracts. So being able to offer things that may not be needed right now, but you can say yes when it gets to that point, means you can stay ahead of the competition. And then ultimately, obviously, you can become more profitable. So margins generally may be higher in certain other parts of the world. You may be able to charge larger rates. You may be able to pay your candidates better to get better contractors in. So there's all these things that we can be considered if you have a successful global expansion of your company, basically. But as we said, there's a lot of things that need to be done to enable it to be done compliantly and correctly. So Charles, if I can just sort of pass to you in terms of what is Giant Global, what was the idea of it when we set it up, and then if we kind of chat back and forth on a few of the questions that I know the guys will have, that would be great.
Sure, no problem. Thanks, Rich. Good to be joining you today. So look, I guess ultimately Giant has always, well, certainly for the last number of years, had a little bit of a dabbling in global anyway. We've worked with clients in the past to provide global payroll solutions, and I think if you go back to the early noughties, the group had incorporations in places like France and Germany and Ireland. So really everything that we do is built on the back of our proprietary software, and it's always had the capability to offer global solutions. It's multi-jurisdictional, multi-currency, and really what we've been doing in recent times is just extending out more so what we do in the UK to the global location. So we've been adding in those kind of front-end employment options globally, and that's ultimately what global payroll is. It is a solution where we're looking to pay predominantly contract workers outside of the UK, and there's a number of different ways that can happen. We essentially have 2 types of key service, what we call EOR, which is employer of record, and that, as it sounds, is where we employ the worker. They would have a full local employment contract. We run a payroll. They receive a net pay along with a pay slip. So full compliance, and all administration kind of handled for a worker. The other way that we also look to operate is via something called an agent of record. Now, this is where we're making an engagement with perhaps a self-employed or a limited company contractor. And so there's a few sort of, I guess, differences with that type of engagement, because ultimately we're not running a payroll. So we're not necessarily dealing directly with the tax side of things. But what we certainly are doing is a full compliance check on an individual, looking at the way that they're being engaged, making sure that a self-employed solution is the correct way for that individual to operate. And I guess also the different types of structures is what we're looking at. I think, if I remember correctly, in France, there's something like, I think it's like 12 or 14 different types of self-employed registration. So it's not as though there's a one size fits all. There's lots of different ways that people could be set up. And so it's then looking at those, making sure that they are compliant and correct, and not only for the worker to be set up correctly, but also that the engagement with the end client is correct as well.
So Charles,
there's a number of things that we do there.
On the employee of record, is that, as people would know, equivalent to umbrella then within the UK? Is that a similar thing to that?
Essentially, yes. Yeah, I mean, more often than not, when you go outside of the UK, you don't necessarily have the employment structure where you have the overarching contract, where you can stay employed by giant umbrella, do one contract with one client, take a little break, move on to the next one, and so on and so on, and you kind of keep that overarching contract in place. More often than not, it is a fixed term employment contract that will last for the duration of a project. And when that project comes to an end, then the contract is brought to an end, and then you could move to a new location, or you could stay in the same location and then start a new project and have another new contract at that point in time. But essentially, I guess the essence of being employed by someone other than the end client and having a full payroll run that's fully compliant with taxes deducted at source, receiving a payslip, all those activities are absolutely in line with an umbrella company in the UK.
Right, okay. And also one more question on that. So the agent of record or the employer of record, who would make the decision around which type of contract the individual will be on? Because obviously in the UK with IR35 and the the KID document, where we're working out which is the best product for them, is there a similar task that needs to be done, and who would do that in these kind of scenarios?
Yeah, absolutely. Most countries have some form of what we would call IR35 legislation in place. It's called different things in different countries, but essentially there is some process that you need to follow to establish how is this individual actually being engaged by the end client. So we've developed a questionnaire that we use that is basically an international version of an IR35 assessment, and what it does, it really just gives a good steer. And it draws on things from AUG legislation in Germany, from WAB legislation in the Netherlands, from IR35 legislation here in the UK. And it just gives, as I say, a really good idea as to how is this individual actually going to be engaged by the end client? What's the reality of the situation? And then that can give an indication to say, right, really, does this look and feel like an employee, and should they be in an employed solution? Or does this look and feel like an independent contractor who would absolutely be valid to work as a freelancer or as a limited company? So we can do that assessment at the start. What I would say is it's not a legal document. This is something that we've developed ourselves, and it's there to give an opinion and to help our clients make the right choices. You know, so as opposed to just making a decision on what's the cheapest option, it's actually just putting a bit of due diligence in place and following a process to say we came to a decision on the basis of.
So you substantiated the reason for the type of employee or employment they're on. Yeah. Okay. Great.
Absolutely. And I guess ultimately, when you do look overseas, you know, places like Germany, where you know, not only can you face potential fines and penalties for having someone operating in the wrong type of structure, you know, there's potential criminal charges as well for the owners of the company. So
Important to get it right.
Depending on where you're operating, there's some extra jeopardy there to make sure that you get these sorts of things correct.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. And then Charles, so thinking about, again, selfishly, some of my clients, so contacted by one last week who's been offered some work in Belgium. So has the contractors to go out and work there, has a contract with the company already, but doesn't know next steps. So would you be able to just talk us through typically what would happen here if we were introduced to Giant Global at this point?
Sure. I mean, ultimately, where we are able to assist is that you can still, I guess, make the most of those opportunities without necessarily having to go through the investment and the time and the pain of setting up a whole solution in a new country. You know, we essentially give you the opportunity to test the water without having to jump in.
Yeah.
So when opportunities like that come up, we can provide that compliant payment solution. We can help an agency guide them through that assessment to see which type of structure should be used, and then provide the appropriate payment solution so that they can still, the agency can still absolutely contract with their end client, invoice them, receive payment in the normal way.
Mm-hmm.
We can then engage with the worker, make sure that there's a fully compliant payment solution in place for that worker as well. And I guess it does a couple of things. One is it's ultimately protecting the contract chain. So it's protecting the contractor themselves, making sure that they're working in the correct way, and that, you know, either the taxes are being taken care of for them through an employed structure, or that they've got all the correct building blocks in place to make sure that taxes can be paid through a self-employed structure. For the recruitment agency, again, it's kind of ticking that compliance box to know that everything is being done correctly, and there's no kind of I guess kick back to them or knock on the door from the tax man in a year's time to say what happened with this individual. You know, they're engaging with someone like us who is taking care of that compliance part. And then also for the end client, again, down through that contract chain, they can then see that there is a compliance partner in place who's dealing with that tax side of things, and making sure that there's not going to be something coming back to haunt them at the end. What I would say, though, is there's one thing for agencies to certainly think about, is that you could absolutely be based in the UK. You could have a client in Belgium. You could do work and complete placements in Belgium. You probably also need to take some advice as to whether you would be forming a permanent establishment yourself, though. Because even though you're based here in the UK, if your client's in Belgium and you're generating revenue from Belgium, and the contractor is essentially working in Belgium as well, there is a potential risk that you form a permanent establishment and then might still, as a business, have a tax liability in that country. So it's something that you would probably need to take specialist advice from a lawyer to be on the safe side. But essentially, I guess that payment vehicle and the payment side of things, that's where we can absolutely help, and I guess as I say, let someone test the waters without having to say, you know, incorporate their own company in Belgium, engage with lawyers and accountants and open up offices and start putting boots on the ground.
That's great. And one thing you've reminded me, Charles, so obviously we're talking around obviously the payroll side of things, so how we compliantly pay the workers, the importance of that. The other aspect is, however you're raising your invoices as a recruitment agency, you need to consider what information is needed on those invoices, consider the tax laws around the invoices depending on the country you're dealing with. So as Giant Finance, if we were to be financing your agency, raising the invoice on your behalf, we made sure that they go out compliantly. So some countries require company registration numbers on them, VAT numbers, etc. Different tax laws, as we said, different currencies, so we can make sure that information goes out in the same way and still continue to fund at 100% up front. And then, as we have recently, Charles, we brought on a joint client together. We make sure that the payment and the remittance is with Giant Global on a Wednesday each week, if it's a weekly payroll, ensuring that the workers get paid as and when they need to. And I think it probably is worth just highlighting the timeframes as well, Charles. So a typical UK agency, timesheets Tuesday, payroll Wednesday, in the bank account on a Friday. Not always as simple as that.
No, absolutely. I think if we were looking at an AOR solution, agent of record, where we're dealing with a limited company or a self-employed worker, then yes, absolutely, that would be true. The turnaround times can be pretty quick on that type of structure. When you are looking at a fully employed solution, ultimately you still have to do that gross to net calculation. The way that we operate is we have expert local partners that we work with, and so we have to once we receive that time information, we have to get that across to a local accountant. They have to process that through their payroll software, send us back that information, and so that can take another day or two to get that gross to net done. It's not quite as quick as it is here in the UK, and also, you know, there can be specific timeframes that you have to try and achieve on the continent when you're running payrolls. So timings can be pushed some on occasion, and so you have to work with your clients to make sure that information flow is starting at the right point in time to meet a payroll deadline. But ultimately, where you do have those extra, I guess, components within the structure, it's always worthwhile allowing a few extra days. And what we try to do is really work out payroll timetables with our clients, so that we know from the point of what date does the worker need to have the money in their account, we can work back from there to say, right, what date do we actually need to receive the time information from the agency. And as ever, though, I guess with the contract world, you know, you've got to wait to the end of the month to put in your timesheet and have it all approved and signed off before you can start that process. So it's very much about managing those expectations as to how quickly something can be turned around with a full payroll.
Yeah, brilliant. So one of the comments I've just seen on the screen there is obviously where we can support at the moment, or where can we support. So we've got 4 continents and 18 countries. And Betty did mention that you're on a global mission, Charles. So I assume we're looking to increase those numbers.
Yeah, for sure. That's what we're paying as of right now. We're paying contractors in 18 different countries across 4 continents, but our actual coverage is much further than that. We're really, I think now it's over 100 countries where we can offer either an EOR or an AOR solution. So Europe, that's obviously we started from the UK, and so Europe was the obvious place for us to expand to first of all. When we were starting this project, we spoke to our current UK clients, and everyone pretty much everyone said, and are you going to America as well? Yeah. And so America, the US is where we also opened up. And we've done a combination really to give us as much coverage as possible. So we have our own incorporations in around 10 countries, including the US. And then we work with partners as well. That gives us the ability to cover South America, Asia, and the rest of Europe. I would say the only place at the moment where we're maybe a little bit light would be Africa, where again, it's possibly still a little bit less compliant, let's say. Not to say that it's not quite the Wild West, but there are a few more solutions available over there that perhaps wouldn't meet muster as far as what we expect here in the UK. So it's a continent where we haven't jumped into yet with both feet, but certainly everywhere else in the world we've got solutions available.
Well, 4 continents sounds plenty to be getting on with, for sure.
Absolutely, so keeping us busy.
I think our next slide, Betty, was just, again, we were unfortunately talking about the risks and challenges that are involved. So I think, Charles, we've spoken about a few of those already. The legal and compliance issues, there may be a couple we want to go in a little bit more detail. The cultural and language issues, again, dependent on the country. I mean, if you're in Western Europe, I think over 200 million people have English as their second language. So we're in a fortunate position coming from England, and that everybody pretty much will understand what we're doing and what we're saying. And then the financing and currency concerns. So I can add a little bit more on that. Can we just have a chat about the legal and the compliance issues in a little bit more detail?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, as you rightly said, we touched on it earlier. The reality is that each country has got its own set of legislations. There are going to be some similarities from place to place, but you really just need to take advice and talk to partners or local experts to really figure out what are the do's and don'ts of working in a particular country. I think that kind of broad stroke, when you're working with contractors, around the similarities between IR35 here in the UK does spread across a lot of countries, and it's something to be aware of, that you can't really just choose that cheap option because it's the cheapest way to go. You do have to think about that engagement type. What we've seen is a lot of countries similar to here in the UK have started to legislate to really put contractors or temporary workers into what we would classify as a PAYE box. And the reality behind that is that governments understand that when someone is working through an employment structure, they gather more tax and they gather more social security. So they bring in more money to run their country. And as a result, they legislate, as has happened here in the UK, to put more people into that employment box. And that's certainly true across the vast majority of Europe and also in the US as well. So it's something to definitely be aware of and to think about, that when your contractor resource comes to you and says, it's fine, I've done it 100 times before and it's not a problem, I'm allowed to work this way, you still maybe need to ask a few more questions just to make sure that it's actually a legal and compliant way of operating.
Remember, he's on the hook. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
One thing, Charles, not on this subject, actually, just you reminded me. So again, I compare it to umbrella because that's, apart from POE, that's how I think about things. So the way that umbrella charges as standard is that the worker pays a fee as a weekly basis. In terms of Giant Global, how does the charge work? Is it a charge to the agency for the process as opposed to the worker?
Sure, we're completely flexible in the way that we would charge for our service. It can be paid by the agency, it can be paid by the worker, and I guess there's a couple of reasons as to why maybe it could be one or the other. So certainly, if you were looking at a self-employed solution or a limited company solution, so what we're calling AOR, agent of record, ultimately the fee that we charge would be considered a business expense. So the contractor could absolutely offset it against their taxes as their tax return at the end of the year. So you could make an argument that it makes sense for the contractor to cover the fee in those circumstances.
Yeah.
Where we're looking at a fully employed solution, then absolutely our fee is a cost to that worker. And so you could argue that maybe it should be something that the agency is looking to cover as part of wanting to provide a compliant service back up to their end client.
Sure.
But again, ultimately, there's going to be, I guess, one figure of money that comes from the end client down the contract chain.
Yeah.
And really all we're talking about is how that sum of money gets chopped up and identified. And so I've spoken with agencies in the past where they come to me and they say, yes, we'd like to use a compliant solution. We need that in place. We want to use the service. How much is the fee, et cetera, et cetera. When you go to a contractor and say your pay rate is €400 a day, and then you say, but you've got to use this compliant service and it's going to cost you the equivalent of €10 a day, that can sometimes rub them up the wrong way. Whereas if you go to them one stage earlier and say, your pay rate is going to be €390 a day, but actually I'm going to give you an extra €10 a day because I need you to use a compliant payroll service and this company will provide it, then you've just framed it in a whole different way that makes them feel good, as opposed to thinking that they're having to pay for something that they didn't necessarily want. Ultimately, though, it all comes from that one sum of money. So it's just about how you frame that and the conversations that you have.
For the agency to take, just bearing in mind compliance is the absolute key around it.
Absolutely, 100%.
That's fine. And also, Charles, so if you're paying a worker in zlotys, for example, would you expect payment in that currency from the agency or their finance provider?
Sure. So again, if they can, that's great. because then there's no currency conversion through. You can agree a contract rate in a particular currency, and it can just get paid through without any issue. We do also have the ability to work with different currencies as well, so that we can convert. So, for example, we could receive in euros, convert to zloty, and then pay the local contract resource in their local currency, and we can do that around the world. Essentially, though, we have a facility to do FX, but we're not an FX company, so we don't fix any rates. What we can do is convert on the spot rate of the day. So it's really just a bit of a value add service to make sure that when those funds hit the contractor's bank account, they don't get hit at that point with a nice big charge from their local bank for conversion and a not particularly good conversion rate. So we do have that ability if needed.
That's great. As Giant Finance, so for our current clients and any new prospects, we pay in euros, we pay in sterling, we pay in dollars. So we can actually set up separate facilities in those currencies. So again, as you said, Charles, there's no conversion issues. If the euro is massive on one day and then drops suddenly the next day before you pay the payroll, that's a risk that you're carrying as an agency. So with us, we can make sure we pay in the required currency, so that risk goes away effectively. And again, that can be added onto a normal facility with Giant Finance at no additional cost. If you're a current client, speak to your client manager. We can get that done for you today. So that's great. I mean, I guess for me, Betty, I don't know if you've had any questions come in. It would be good to answer a few.
Yeah, we've had some questions. So thank you both for sharing your insights so far. I really hope that everyone who has joined has found it really useful. We have got a couple of questions that have come through the Q&A function. So I'm going to start putting them to you guys. So the first question, actually, I can answer. Is this being recorded and shared later? Absolutely. If you join a Giant webinar, we will follow up the next day with a recording and also the opportunity to get in touch with us, which we would love you to do. And then the second question, I'm going to come back to you, Charles. I know you've touched on the legislation when engaging with workers in different countries. We've had a few questions. One which is, do the workers have to be remote as they do not have a work visa? And then someone else who's asked, do you ensure the contractor pays taxes in their country of residence? So could you just talk us through a bit more about where people are in terms of location and what that means for tax?
Yeah, for sure. So on the visa question, right to work is absolutely key. So if you are, let's say, a non-European national wanting to come to work in Europe, you will absolutely need to have a work permit. And with that type of structure, you would normally need to have a company that is sponsoring your work permit. And again, normally the company that sponsors your work permit also has to be the company that employs you. Now, if you then, though, throw in remote working, so if you were a non-European national working remotely from your home country, but for a European client, then absolutely you don't need to have a work permit. If you're sitting at home in South Africa and delivering services to a company in Italy, you don't need to have an Italian work permit to do that. You are physically based in South Africa. That's where your tax liability is created. That's where you are actually working. Delivering your services overseas doesn't require a permit or a visa at all.
Right. What was the second question there, Betty? There was
so I think you answered both questions in terms of location of the workers. Okay. The other question that we have, which is in a similar vein, is a bit more specific. So do you have to have a license to place workers in France, for example?
So I believe as a recruitment agency, you need to hold a license to be able to operate in France. From the payroll side of things, they have a structure over there called portage, which is similar to our umbrella over here. and most portage companies are members of like a trade association. So I don't believe it's a specific license for payroll, but there is an association that most payroll companies will be a member of. But I do believe that recruitment agencies do need to have a specific recruitment agency license to operate over there. France, though, is a little bit of an unusual one, because I think they have, again, been a while since I read up on this, but they've got a piece of legislation that I think goes right back to the French Revolution, that states something like nobody can make money off the back of someone else. It's all to do with slavery, right back at the time of the French Revolution. So I think, you know, being a recruiter and making a margin for placing someone, I think kind of almost, as far as French legislation, it puts you in the slavery bracket, which is obviously in the modern world is completely ridiculous. But there are absolutely ways around it, and I think that is what this license in France is required for.
And non-compliance may result in the guillotine over there, probably. So you know.
Yes, yeah, maybe.
Charles, the only other thing I had, sorry, Betty, was just touched on there again, was on insurances. I've not mentioned if there are any insurances that, you know, that may indemnify the agencies where decisions are being made, or indeed the workers for insurances in those countries. Are you able to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So I guess two points on the insurances. One is that the services that we provide, we obviously have, when we're employing someone, we have all of the correct insurances in place, you know, employer's liability, professional indemnity, etc. If a contractor is working as a freelancer, we can then cover them under our insurances. If they have their own limited company, then they have to hold their own insurances anyway. As far as reclassification is concerned, though, so let's say someone is working as a freelancer and there is an investigation and a reclassification to say, actually, you should be an employee. We don't hold any form of insurance against that. As I say, we've developed our questionnaire so that we can give a good steer and a guide, but it's absolutely still the decision of the recruitment agency as to which type of solution they want to push forward. And that should always be done really with the cooperation and input of the end client to really get to that true answer of, look, how are you actually going to utilize this resource? What is it that you need? And how are you going to interact with this individual? You know, are they really coming in, sitting at a desk, doing something exactly the same as the person sitting next to them? It's just that you need another bum on a seat doing that job because you're super busy. Or are you bringing in someone who's an actual specialist, who's got skills that you don't have within your company? You know, are they going to be truly independent in what they're doing and providing to you? But unfortunately, we don't have an insurance policy to indemnify against reclassification.
That's good. That's good to know, though. Brilliant. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And obviously, if anyone wanted to ask about a different particular country, obviously we can't run through all of the legislation of all of them. But after the session, please get in touch with Charles. He'll be able to give you the down low on any country that we operate in. One last question, I think. So none of my client bases have offices outside of the UK. Why should I bother with global expansion?
I think it goes to what you were saying at the start, Rich, doesn't it, about the opportunity around global expansion. You know, if your current clients aren't global, that's fine, but it doesn't mean that there aren't opportunities for you out there with other global clients. So I would still recommend it, but I would, because that's the world in which I live. Don't know, what do you think on that?
And Rich? I think, Charles, in this day and age, if you're not moving forwards, you're going backwards. Basically, you've got to look at the next thing that's going to happen, particularly in recruitment. It's such a fast-moving market. Talked about technology. You know, you've got to look to be ahead of the curve with the next big thing, and it is going to be global expansion. So I think that's a good question to finish on. Charles, I'd like to thank you for your knowledge and time today.
Thank you for having me.
If anyone wants any more information about finance, be it global or UK, then please get in touch with myself and Charles. I think Giant Global. Anything come across to you, really. But Betty, I'll hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, amazing. Just to reiterate that tomorrow you will be sent an email with this recording, with the contact details in if you'd like to follow up at all. And we'd love to chat to you again soon. So thank you.
Right.
And we'd like to hear your feedback also.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot,
Thanks for
everyone.
your time, everyone. Cheers.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.